Hello, my name is Mirva Johnson, and on behalf of Finlandia Foundation National's Young Leaders Board, I'd like to warmly welcome you all to this panel discussion on gender inequality in the Finnish film industry. We appreciate our panelists and moderator for lending their expertise to this event, and we are grateful to see so many of you joining us today. Finlandia Foundation appreciates this opportunity to collaborate once again with the Embassy of Finland in Washington, D.C. to highlight Finnish art and culture. And I would like to thank our partners at American Scandinavian Foundation for their support of this event. I'll note that the film is still available, the film Force of Habit is still available for streaming until March 3rd through Scandinavia House, and the link can be found in the chat. I would also like to recognize the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Center for European Studies and the Nordic unit of the Department of German, Nordic, and Slavic Plus for their sponsorship of this event. I will now hand things over to Subi to offer welcome on behalf of the embassy.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Mirva. So I'm Suvi. I'm the head of cultural affairs at the Embassy of Finland here in Washington, D.C., and I hope you are tuning in from all over the U.S. So the embassy has cooperated, like Mirva mentioned, with the Young Leaders Board of the Finlandia Foundation National already for like a year and a half. So we want to reach out to young Americans, young Finnish Americans who are interested in Finland, to offer interesting events such as this one, and also to offer you kind of networking possibilities, and furthermore to link young people here in the US with Finnish companies as well. So we really hope that we can help you out with these events that we are organizing together with Young Leaders Board. We have had actually events that have circled around sustainability and also security policy. And now, of course, it's great to have the film industry event today. If you have any suggestions to us about which topics you'd like to hear about, please reach out to us and we can try to take those suggestions into account. Now that there are so many young people there, I hope, I really want to also welcome everybody to Finland to study, to work, to visit. So, you know, Finland is the happiest country in the world for 5 years in a row now. So, you know, there are things there that are kind of welcoming. And we really hope that you can find yourselves in Finland one of these days. There are many things like the startup hub, innovation, also like we are topping on work-life balance, and we try to offer you a safe and reliable society. So we want to really see movement between Finland and US happening as well. But today it's about film industry, so I wanted to kind of say a couple of words about that before I reach out or give the word to the next speaker and to the panel. So there are quite many actually Finnish filmmakers, female filmmakers in Finland, and the proportionality probably more in some other countries or many other countries. And actually in 2022, around 43% of the Finnish production support was granted to films with female directors. Of course, I really hope that one day it's all about directors and you don't have to think about pronouns or genders or anything. But for now, I think it's good to kind of highlight those things that we're trying to do, so to say. And in the Finnish film industry, we aim at developing inclusiveness of the industry together in cooperation between different parties. And this would be including organizations, sponsors, different professional groups and film schools. So this is something I know our Film Foundation can talk about more during the panel discussion, but just wanted to flag that. And as a follow-up to Me Too, actually different parties work together to make instructions for the prevention of sexual harassment. So this is probably the way that we try to kind of do things together. So all the parties are involved in that work. This is, of course, not to say that we are perfect. I'm sure there's always room for improvement. So I think that's important to also say. Finally, very many thanks to our partners here today. So Finlandia Foundation National Young Leaders Board, and special thanks to Mirva. Then I want to thank the American Scandinavian Foundation for co-organizing this event with us. Thank you, Kyle, in particular, and also the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Warm thank you to you as well. And thanks to the panelists, the moderator, and finally, last but not least, to you there in the audience for joining us today. And now I want to give the floor to Sally from the American Scandinavian Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Suvi. I'm really pleased to be here today representing the American Scandinavian Foundation and Scandinavia House. Since 1912, the American Scandinavian Foundation has been supporting cultural exchange between the US and Nordic countries. And I oversee all of our fellowship and grant program at ASF, and encourage you all to think about studying in Finland or doing research in Finland. We have support for that for both master's thesis level students and PhD students. So please be in touch with us if you're interested. We would be happy to talk to you about it and let you know more about the opportunities that we offer. I'm pleased to be here today, especially because two of our fellows are involved in this program. Merva recently had a fellowship from us, and our moderator, Liina-Ly Roos, had a fellowship from ASF in 2017. So this makes it a very special event, even though overall it's very special, but especially special. Liina-Ly is an assistant professor of Scandinavian Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We supported her to look at research on the image of the child in Scandinavian cinema and its connection to the collective memories of World War II in the Nordic countries. But today we're focused specifically on Finland, and Liina-Ly will lead the discussion on this film that I hope you've all seen or will see soon. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Embassy of Finland and to the Finlandia Foundation for collaborating with us on this event. And I wish to send you all good wishes from New York. Liina-Ly?
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone, for these wonderful introductions and for this event. It's really exciting for me to be here today to moderate the discussion on this amazing film and issues of gender and gender equality in Finnish film and Finnish film industry. As Sally said, I am assistant professor here at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I mostly research and teach topics related to Nordic and Baltic film and culture. And I know that there are some students in the audience today that are from the Nordic film class here in the US. So it's really exciting for them to hear and for us all to just hear these wonderful thoughts that I know everyone will be able to share shortly. So I will start by sharing some introductions of each of the four panelists today, and then we will get started with our discussion. So first is Reetta Aalto, who is co-director of the film Force of Habit. She is a Helsinki-based film director and screenwriter of both fiction and documentary films. Her work as a screenwriter and director include the documentary film Grey Violet, Odd One Out, which premiered at the Hot Docs Film Festival, and the award-winning internet hit animation Pussy for Beginners. Her most recent directorial work is the feature Laughing Matters, written by Anna Ruohonen. Then next is Anu Koivunen, who is a professor of gender studies in the School of History, Culture and Arts Studies at the University of Turku. She is a docent in media culture at the University of Tampere, as well as in cinema and TV studies and women's studies at the University of Helsinki. Her research focuses on media, affect and feminist media studies, gender and politics, cultural media studies, and journalism studies. Then Marjo Pipinen works in the communications department of the Finnish Film Foundation, which is the biggest public film funding body in Finland. They have Master of Arts degree in cinema studies from Stockholm University. And then Benjamin Mier-Cruz is an assistant professor of Scandinavian Studies and Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Their research examines Nordic writers and filmmakers of color and intersectional representations of gender, sexuality, and race. And their current book project explores contemporary representations of non-whiteness in Swedish documentary films and visual culture. So happy that you are all here, and let's get started on our discussion. So my first question, and we have decided with the panelists that I will mostly ask sort of a few questions from each of them, and then they will have a little time to answer. So I won't interrupt with questions all the time, but I will start with Reetta. And my first question for you is, if you could tell us a little bit about how the project of the film got started. All of these situations that Force of Habit, the film that I hope many of us saw who are here today, they show us women experiencing and talking about sexual harassment and sexual assault, are probably familiar to many people watching the film either in Finland or in the US. Here in the US, however, we often talk about how Finland and other Nordic countries have made much more progress when it comes to gender equality, but the film suggests that there are still challenges in that society as well and work to be done. So if you could just tell us sort of how the storylines of the film represent what you have observed in Finland or experienced in Finland, and just about the project a little bit overall.
Yeah, let me begin with explaining a little bit what Force of Habit is, because it's this feature film, but also a series of separate short films, 11 in total, and an outreach campaign. So this feature film is edited together from 6 of those short films, but the whole project is way bigger. And it was an initiative of the production company, Tuffi Films, and their founding members, Elli Toivoniemi and Kirsikka Saari, noticed perhaps around 2015 already, that they were at the office all the time talking about similar things, all these little issues that, all these little incidences that just happen and pass by to women, that happen to women especially, and like these everyday occurrences, which are considered kind of like just normal, that you just have to live with, but still they leave some kind of mark. And they got really frustrated and decided that why don't we do something about it? And they contacted a bunch of Finnish female filmmakers. At start, it was just filmmakers, and then later we were joined by some like scholars and activists and artists from different fields. But in the beginning, it was us filmmakers. And we started getting together and talking about, well, first of all, they asked us, like, do we have this kind of feeling that these kind of things happen all the time? And everybody was like, yes, and yes, we want to be part of this. I mean, for me, it was a no-brainer. When I got that phone call, it felt like I had been waiting for this like all my life. This was really, really a great opportunity. And when I heard about who else is involved, I was really excited. And so we started getting together, and we talked, but we also went to see stand-up comedy. We took dance classes together and just spent a lot of time together and discussing this subject matter. And then little by little, everybody came up with their suggestions, like what their story could be. Some of them were personal, some of them were something that we developed together. Maybe it happened to someone else, but someone then started writing their story about it. But anyway, it was this kind of tight collective, and all of the stories were developed together. And we got so much support from each other, because, for example, my story is the one that happens in the bedroom after a house party. And I must say, I probably wouldn't dare to be so simple, like focus on such a small thing, you know, because it's really, the short film is, I think, 15 minutes or 20 minutes, like material in the film. And there's not that much happening, but that's the whole point. in that story. And so I got like also this kind of artistic support from our collective to dare to really look at the female experience in that kind of situation. And I'm so happy about the whole project, and it's so great to represent it still, even though it's years after, but I think it's still current, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. Could you, as you just mentioned, there are some of these storylines in the film that are quite disturbing and difficult to watch too. And could you tell us how you approached making the film about these very challenging and difficult experiences that people have gone through?
Yeah, the whole point was kind of to focus on, I don't know how to say this, not be like offending anybody, but like not so serious cases, you know, like to look at those kind of things that all of us have experienced. And so that no one can really turn away from the film. Everybody's been maybe in that bus, you know, when someone gets harassed, maybe just witnessing something like this happened, or at that party, like the workplace party, like everybody can find themselves in those situations. Maybe not necessarily the main character's experience, but nevertheless, we've all seen and witnessed these kind of things. So, I mean, we were kind of afraid in the beginning that perhaps it's not enough, because I mean, there are just horrible things happening all the time as well. So is this enough? But I think it really was the collective that, because we were equally annoyed and like raging about similar kind of like some of which are like these kind of almost like microaggressions, but the whole point was to kind of gather together from different kind of perspectives to kind of show the bigger picture, and I think we managed to do that. And yeah, I'm super happy that we had guts to make it so subtle and not go to the extreme possible cases. Well, the court case is pretty extreme, I must say, but if you probably get my point.
Yes, and I don't want to give away too much from the film for people who haven't yet watched it, but there's definitely one of the storylines that I really appreciated as a kind of an illustration to what you're saying was that there's a storyline of a woman who is performing a theater play and has to have a pretty explicit rape scene, but the film is not really showing that to us. And I thought, and it was such a interesting way that you all, that filmmakers, decided how to do that, because we hear the sounds of her in the recording studio, and we are often reminded that this is just a performance in the context of this film, while it is very troubling for the actress who has to play that scene and is trying to express that maybe there's different ways of doing it, but is not really heard by her male colleagues, sadly, in that storyline.
Yeah, we were like also wanting to all the time, even though they are like personal experiences of women, then at the same time we wanted to kind of all the time remind about the power structures and the whole system behind all of these incidences. So I think the part that takes place in the theater is really giving us the context, like how all of our stories are also portraying women as victims, and then elsewhere. Meanwhile, they are being victimized for real. So it's like systematic. And the director of that particular sequence is or story is actress herself, or nowadays she's a director as well, but so she really has personal experience of that, and she made a wonderful monologue about the same subject. And then I think that's why she was asked to participate in this, and happily she was ready to make this for the film also.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I could maybe, yeah, I forgot to say like how we worked the stories.
Yeah.
Like we were kind of given free hands, like to do whatever we wanted. We had only few guidelines, like they all had to happen like contemporary time, and the style had to be somewhat realistic. Some of the stories maybe lean more to comedy and some towards drama, but still they are in like a realistic nowadays setting. And then we had like heads of departments, like same for each film. We did use different like cinematographers and like artistic crew, but we still had the heads of departments kind of coordinating that the style is somewhat cohesive. It's not exactly, but it doesn't matter. They kind of go together well anyways. And also we had Kirsikka Saari, who's a screenwriter and a director. She was like the main screenwriter. We all wrote our individual stories, but she coordinated us just to see that the stories aren't too similar, that we would have this kind of like a spectrum of things. And then of course we weren't allowed to cast same actors so that the stories could be edited together. But those were really the guidelines. Other than that, we were kind of free. But like I said, we were kind of meeting regularly and discussing where we were, and so everybody was all the time kind of very aware of what others are doing.
Quite a different experience, I imagine, from if one is directing just by themselves to have this collaborative team.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the directors and writers' work is like lonely, even though we think like film directing is like collective work, but it's just at the shootings, like at the shoot. But other than that, it's often lonely work. But this was different.
Great. I have one more question for you, and then we'll move on, which is about reception. How has this film been received in Finland and elsewhere too, maybe? Yeah,
well, I mean, the reception has been great. The feature got several nominations for the Jussi Awards, which is like the Finnish Oscars. And it also received a prestigious Nordic Film Award. And we were, for the short film series and the outreach campaign, we were awarded a state award, which is one of the most prestigious awards there is in Finland. And yeah, so that says something. But also then internationally, we haven't traveled that much because of the pandemic hit us, or the international release of the film. But the film has traveled and also gotten awards internationally. And then finally, like about a year ago, well, quite exactly a year ago, I managed to go to Luxembourg. This was one of the first festivals that opened. Lux Film Festival, and there was very special like screenings, 2 screenings, one of which was for the local international high school. So we had like I'm just talking about this because the film is really, we wanted to, like our target audience is the young people, because they can still make a change. So I'm so happy about this screening. And we had the film theater full of high school students. And then after the screening, we had a Q&A, and one girl stood up from the audience, and she got the microphone, and she said, even though I'm 16, well, first of all, she said, like, thank you for the film. Even though I'm 16, I've already experienced all of what you portray in the film. That was, of course, like very chilling to hear and sad, but at the same time, like it felt so privileged to be there and to have this discussion with these kids. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for these answers. And we'll move on to Anu Koivunen now. But just a reminder to everyone, as the chat, I think, says so too, if anybody has questions while we're talking, please feel free to write those questions in the Q&A, and we will have some time for questions from the audience around in about a half hour or so. But so moving on to Anu Koivunen, and my questions for you are mostly about representations of gender or gender equality or lack of that in Finnish films. So if you could tell us a little bit about how gender equality or lack of it has been represented and dealt with in recent Finnish films, and whether there have been any changes or tendencies that align with how that has been addressed throughout the history of Finnish cinema. And do you sort of expect any of these tendencies to continue in the future?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I feel that as a 50+ person, I'm the old lady in the room, remembering the times that were not so exciting, because I think that would be my sort of opening line, saying that I think that the past 10 years have been an exciting time for Finnish film production. Of course, I should say as a start that Force of Habit, I loved the film. I wrote about the film, a short piece where I described it as images that change us, that transform us, but it's a very distinctive Finnish film because it explicitly problematizes differences and power in this subtle way, as Reetta described, and we to sort of answer your question about how Finnish film addresses gender equality or inequality, well, short answer, it doesn't usually do it, but there are rare occasions when it doesn't, and I think Force of Habit was this kind of tour de force when that happened. And I also have very powerful experiences from teaching it with gender studies students at Tampere University. There were contexts, it was also sort of post Me Too years, and then at the same time a campaign about changing the rape legislation towards the consent conceptualization. So it sort of spoke really to many generations of especially women, but of course more widely younger people. I think the main narrative concerning Finnish film at the moment is, I dare to say, one of increasing diversity and especially the visibility and the share of female directors that has risen. It's very hard to think back, like when you've reached a point when you can see Force of Habit, or when you can go see Girl Picture by Aili Haapasalo, or you've seen, well, Zaida Bergroth's biopic Uwe Jansson, or a documentary like Hobby Horse Revolution by Selma Vilhunen. It's very hard to imagine 10 to 12 years back, and sort of you couldn't imagine these films. And it sounds radical when I say it, but I thought about it preparing for this discussion, that I think it's an intense period of lots of hopes, while cinema business at the moment is in turmoil because of many things. I think in terms of Finnish film production, there's a lot of as much as it allows. It's a very conservative genre, feature films, but I think that there is movement and dynamic, and a lot has to do with gender, in the sense that because the number of female directors is much larger than it used to be prior to, something like 2007-8, those were really bad years. Then there were years when no Finnish, there were no women directors releasing feature films those years. It has changed to a situation when we expect exciting things from films, and because the number of female directors has risen, it has also entailed a change in the kinds of protagonists and subjects of films. So it's really, having worked with feminist film theory and those kinds of issues for a longer while, I know that nothing is more boring to directors than being typecast as gendered directors. But we know that there is a correlation between the kinds of persons who do films and the kinds of stories told and the kinds of protagonists and the kinds of foci in the film. So I think this is the perspective of hope and excitement from this kind of older feminist perspective that I see. I think that I'm representing in this situation, that the big themes of Finnish film have been the kinds of problems and issues with modernization of Finnish society, urbanization, all of its aspects, what it has entailed, or of course the big questions of war and peace, or civil war 1918 and Second World War, a long period. It has just produced a lot of focus on male psyche, in not only in popular kind of genres, but also the kind of modernist waves have fed into it. So if we have a kind of sweeping, longer narrative of the 20th century Finnish cinema, there were very few films after the Second World War that were about women or female friendships. And we all know, of course, that this is not just the case with Finnish film history. It's a much wider issue that Bechdel tests and such, of course, testify to. But now the girls and girly issues can be the main thing, and female relationships of different sorts. You can imagine those becoming more important. And of course, there's a push then to challenge this diversity beyond gender. Gender and Force of Habit, of course, did that to some extent. At least the 11 short films, whole of it sort of was not only about gender and sexuality, it was about many kinds of differences and power issues. So I think that the kind of what kind of stories are told, what kind of protagonists we see, there is a dynamism happening, and when you ask about future, what might be happening, one thing that came to my mind is that it's going to be interesting to see, it's going to take some time, but how the Russian invasion to Ukraine is whether there's going to be a switch back to this kind of more national narratives, inward-looking, conservative kind of storytelling, or whether this kind of sense of Finnish films co-produced internationally, engaging, networking, being good stories that can speak to anybody, not so about Finland. If we're going to re-experience that, we had that in the late 1990s, so we know what it looks like. It resulted in male biopics and news stories about war. I hope we don't get there.
Thank you so much, Anu. There is hope. That is great to hear. Wonderful overview. And I think we can move on right now to Marjo Pipinen. And my questions for you are, if you could first tell us how Finnish Film Foundation works, like what does it do? What's the process like for films to get funding through the foundation? But then if you could also tell us how gender or other identity categories like sexuality or race are part of the decisions that the foundation makes when making the decisions of funding.
Yes, I hope to clarify that, and I hope this is not the boring part of the discussion. Yes, the Finnish Film Foundation is an independent foundation, but we are supervised by the Ministry of Education and Culture, and we receive our funds from the ministry. And they come from lottery and pools funds at the moment, perhaps in the future from tax money, but currently from lottery funds. And as said, we're the biggest public funder of film in Finland, but no longer the only funder, or well, we've never been the only one, but for a long time it was the situation was so that you could say that most, if not all, Finnish films that came to cinemas in Finland were funded by the Finnish Film Foundation, but currently there's much more private funds, private money going into film production. And looking at numbers from last year, there were a huge number of domestic releases, 39 feature fiction films, and 24 of those were funded by us. So 15 films that were funded through other means. We support the film industry in many ways. In addition to production support, we give script writing grants, support cinemas and distribution, marketing, international promotion of Finnish films, and also different projects. And I want to mention that we promote accessibility of Finnish films by supporting audio description and subtitling for the hearing impaired. And last year we granted 25.1 million euros of support, and 18.3 million went to development and production of films. I have to say that this is much, it's a lot smaller number than in our Scandinavian neighboring countries. Sweden, Norway, and Denmark are way ahead of us when it comes to public funding of film. But yes, so this 18.3 million euros covers feature films, documentary, animation, and short films as well, and also development support for drama series. And so we give support to Finnish films, but also minority co-productions, which are very big in Europe, like or co-productions in general. And last year we supported 23 feature films, and 6 of them were minority co-productions. But the Finnish production company is always the applicant. And I guess I'll focus on feature films, fiction films here. And we have 2 film commissioners who are in charge of feature films and who handle the applications, but the final decisions are made by our board. And if the application is rejected, the company can reapply. So usually then they would get a different film commissioner handling the application. And for production support, last year we had 194 applications, all genres included, and 63 projects got funded. So about a third of the applications got support. We don't have quotas. If I go more deeply into this questions of equality and underrepresented groups in Finnish cinema, we don't have any. We've never had any quotas for female filmmakers, for example. The film commissioners have several guidelines that they follow when they look at the projects that are submitted. Of course, artistic quality and the ability of the production company and the professionals who are doing the film, their ability to execute the projects the way the production plan shows us. For example, that the budget is realistic. But on a longer cycle, so we have 4 deadlines a year for production support. And on a cycle of, let's say, 1 to 3 years, we look at the diversity of the projects that we fund. But that includes many different aspects. So the diversity of the filmmakers, that there are different genders represented, different backgrounds, geographical diversity, that they're not all Helsinki-based projects. We want to make sure that there are enough projects with new filmmakers, debut filmmakers, and that we have projects with international potential as well as local box office hits, and children's films, different genres, comedy, horror. So this is it's a puzzle trying to get this like a diverse slate of films so that there are films for different kinds of audiences. And I don't know if you can read this, our poster, our kind of tagline is Finnish films share all our stories. And we've gotten a lot of criticism for it as well. People say that it's not true, and I agree, it's not, perhaps it's not true yet, but this is more like what we are aiming at. And through our communications, we are trying to also kind of, for the production companies and for the producers to say that that you should bring us different kinds of projects, diverse projects. We want to fund all kinds of films. Yeah, so one of the tasks that we have is collecting statistics, and we are trying to collect statistics also on, we have been collecting statistics on gender, women and male filmmakers for many, many years, and now we're trying to get data also on underrepresented groups, so like ethnic minorities. It's been a little bit difficult so far. We've done it a couple of years with an Excel sheet, which has caused some concern regarding privacy protection. So now we are trying to develop a system where we could get anonymous data on both the filmmakers of the films, of the projects that we have funded, as well as on the characters that we see on screen. And this year, with Finland, so Women in Film and TV in Finland has been developing with our support this new tool for producers for creating an equity plan for each production. And we are we're cooperating with them and trying to maybe incorporate this like data collection in the tool so that it would be anonymous. And for example, we could get information on gender minorities, sexual minorities as well as ethnic minorities, because now with the Excel sheet, it's the producer who is collecting this information from the crew, and it hasn't been working great so far. But yes, we are very much looking forward to getting that data and looking at it more closely. Other than that, yeah, as I said, through our communications, we're trying to convey that we're interested in different kinds of projects, and we did a series of articles on diversity in Finnish film that's on our website, also translated in English if anyone is interested in reading those. And we're doing different kinds of cooperations. We're part of New Dawn Film Fund, which launched last year, and that's a cooperation between several different European public funding bodies, and the fund is giving money to underrepresented filmmakers in Europe and people from discriminated groups. So maybe a few numbers from last year regarding gender equality. Last year, these numbers are about feature fiction films. So 40% of the production support went to women directors projects, and 46% to women scriptwriters projects. So there were 23 feature films and 14 directed by men and 9 by women. And the average support sum was slightly higher for women directors projects, so 555,000 euros versus 544,000 euros for male directors projects. With producers, the number is slightly worse, so only 6 women producers, 26% of the projects. And we also looked at the film premieres from last year. Maybe this is the final number that I'll share. So like I said before, there were 24 Film Foundation funded premieres and 15 other, let's say, indie films. And the numbers, like the gender equality numbers, were much better for the films that we funded. So it looks like the private money is more conservative when it comes to hiring women as directors. So I think that's like a good sign for us that we're doing good work. We're going in the right direction here at the Finnish Film Foundation.
Great. So there is hope also, similarly to. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marjo, for sharing all of this. I think these numbers are really interesting to kind of get the idea and image of what's going on. So I think we'll move on to Benjamin now, and then later there will be time for any more questions for anyone. So coming now more to sort of broader Nordic and even US perspective, could you tell us about teaching and researching Nordic and Finnish films, specifically when focusing on gender and its intersections with other identities in the US? So what are some challenges, similarities, differences, and in your experience? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'm really excited to be able to use this film in future classes. I know, Liina-Ly, you're using it, and so this just can speak to students in so many ways. I think what was really fascinating about this film is that you get so many nuanced perspectives from different people who are not only directly affected by some of the sexism and sexual assault, sexual abuse, but those who are hearing about it, responding to it, or not responding to it. And it's just I think it did it very realistically, the way that, yeah, certain people can have very complex reactions to it. And that provides spaces for students, for example, to also respond in similar ways. I think that showing these kinds of films in a US context allows us to kind of really question our own positionalities, for example. We, at least in the US, and as has been advertised today, we consider the Nordic countries to be like the happiest places in the world, the most gender equal, these astonishing achievements when it comes to gender equality, which that's just amazing. And we teach about these things, but this film shows that despite these achievements, that these issues related to sex, sexual assault, sexism, gender power disparities, they're very deep-seated, and they're rooted in these hegemonic structures, systemic structures that even these successfully gender equal countries, they're still dealing with. And I really like what has been mentioned, or Reetta mentioned earlier, is that a lot of these situations in the film were not too serious, so air quotes, like they, many characters in the film just, like, okay, they were more inconvenienced by hearing about them, for example. And what this does is it allows us to see that, these situations, these unfortunate circumstances, they are quite serious, no matter how innocuous they might be to some people, that they leave impressions on the body and on the psyche over time. So for example, Reetta mentioned that during the screening, the 16-year-old viewer, she said, she's experienced all of this. It reminds me also of the story of the young woman on the bus or in Reetta, in your film, like in your portion of the film, the party, she's on the beginning, there's this tension, like, it's ominous that, that she's uncomfortable. She's repeatedly asked to, to go out. And then there's this tension, this push and pull of like, oh, is he, not appreciating her boundaries, or is he going too far? He's not doing anything yet. But then, of course, as the film progresses, we see that it does become more nefarious. And then here we have a passive sexual assault here. And the film just addresses very different ways that assault happens, and regardless of whether it's physical or not, it does leave, as I mentioned, impressions on the body. And this allows students to kind of see that happening without the graphic violence. And the other segment with the theater actress that Liina-Ly, you also mentioned earlier, I think that segment does that very well too, because we see in the actress's eyes the whole time how just she is uncomfortable for so many reasons, not just the discussion of the rape, but the fact that her voice is silenced in this. In fact, if we were to look closely at that, you see that her dress even has more power in ways. They're more concerned about the dress and like maybe cut the rape scene, because then you cut down on the cost of like reproducing the dress, for example. Or Liina-Ly, you also mentioned the recording of her voice. Her voice, stands in for the actual scene of the rape, but then that voice is recorded and it becomes archived, and they can use that voice again and again and play it in different contexts, but it's still symbolic of this rape, and that rape overtakes the character of Catherine in the play. It becomes the character. We don't really know anything about Catherine, the character. It's just, the rape that happens. And so thinking about these things, another thing that teaching Nordic films in American context allows us, as I mentioned, to question our positionality. And for example, look at different ways that we can challenge us to consider empathy and how we empathize with others. So there's the other segment where the woman and her husband are on vacation, and she's stunned that her husband does not empathize with her situation. And later on in the film, sorry for the spoiling, he comes around a little bit, but then he forgets it as soon and he moves on. And so, yeah, these films allow us to see different cultures that we might just expect to be immune from these problems of sexual assaults. We see that they're not immune. And then speaking of immunity, they are also not immune from, questions regarding homophobia or racism, for example. And so what I like to do in these courses, in my Nordic film courses, that deal heavily with gender and sexuality, is to, highlight, the intersectional ways that characters or filmmakers, how they're affected by disparate power structures. So for example, when race comes into play, or if someone is trans or queer, bisexual, etc., it affects or it adds layers to these very uncomfortable situations, or dangerous or deadly situations, when they come into unwanted physical or even, emotional abuse. And so what I like to do in my classes is to highlight as much as I can filmmakers of color, or, trans characters. For example, I like to show this very difficult film, short film by Esa Jodame called Toxic, and that's based on some non-fictional accounts of assault and domestic abuse. And then so she interviews a person who is a non-binary trans woman of color who's in a queer domestic abuse relationship. So those nuances allow us, regardless of our own positionality, to kind of see the many ways that people are affected by these situations, and that even the most harmless, innocuous form of assault actually does really cut deep, and, as I mentioned, leaves impressions on the body for time to come.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. And this is a really good time now for us all to transition perhaps to questions for all from the audience or from the panelists to each other, also fine, I think. I have received just a couple of questions at this point, so everyone feel free to please write in the chat your questions. One of them from earlier on was a question about to Reetta, about whether there has been feedback from people, and you already talked about the story of the high schooler who said that they have experienced something similar. And the question is if there has been maybe more feedback from people saying, yes, this is happening in our society, this has happened to me too. So maybe you could just speak a little bit more about that.
Yes. Well, we know that the short films have been watched, I don't have the exact number, but millions of times. And in a country like Finland, that is a lot. Mm-hmm. So it is widely used at schools. Mm-hmm. And there is also this outreach campaign, so we've provided a lot of material and links to where to get help if you've ever faced like such situations, and also what the law says about these things, and all sorts of material kind of tied to each individual film and its themes. Mm-hmm. So that's been super popular, and we've gotten a lot of feedback through that particular website. Mm-hmm. And one of what I got personally, I remember that always, because I feel emotional even now talking about it, but one woman wrote me that she had faced exactly a similar kind of situation that my story portrays. And she had managed to get away from a situation that could have developed to be perhaps rape. And she said that she had seen the film Force of Habit, and now she, like, I never even in my wildest dreams thought that this would have like so direct effects on people's lives. So this is just one, of course, but yeah. And then in a lot of the screenings that we've been, there is this phenomenon in Finland that it's often like middle-aged and older women who go to see theater or movies. So it's a little bit older women. But in all of the screenings where I've been present, there's always someone who's perhaps been young in the 70s. And they are the maddest ones. They stand up and start shouting, like, why doesn't it ever change? Why? How can it be that you are still telling these stories, like my stories? So, I mean, we've gotten this feedback a lot. And this is once again very sad to hear, but a proof that the material really touches on like important issues.
Thank you so much for sharing this answer. So I have another question here that is for everyone. Anyone can answer for this question. So it says, I noticed that the stories of sexual harassment and assault in the film centered around the experiences of white cisgendered women. What do you think the film's reception and impact would have been if the experiences of women of color or sexual minorities, which are not, of course, mutually exclusive identities in Finland, had been a larger focus? So like, why not to explore the impact of both racial and sexual violence in a film that is intended to highlight such a pervasive and intersectional topic such as rape, sexual harassment, and society's long-standing power imbalances? So anyone who would like to answer this?
Well, I can answer briefly that in this feature film, this is correct. We are mainly cis white, hetero, almost middle-aged women, all of us. So the portrayal is, of course, somewhat narrow. But in the short films, there is also other kinds of representations. So the whole project isn't that white and that straight.
And are the other films that are not part of Force of Habit, are those also available for people to watch anywhere?
They travel also. We have like a French distribution company, but I don't know how to the US market at the moment. I don't know. In Finland, they are available. They are on our national broadcasters website, but I think it's not available internationally.
So to anyone who has power on this issue, we would love to have access to all the films, if possible, here in the States as well.
They travel the festival as kind of curated packages, but that's all I know.
Great.
At the moment.
I could perhaps reply in more generally regarding the discussion on race and ethnicity in Finnish films. It's a really new discussion in Finland, in the film industry as well. I mentioned the article series we did on diversity in Finnish film industry. That was from 2 years ago, and then we had articles from people of color, and also maybe I'll share a link to the articles. There was a very good article on casting diversity in Finnish film, and it's a really new topic here, but we are seeing more films, and I mean, before, the problem has also been that there have not been so many professional actors who are not white. But I would say the discussion is here now, and hopefully in the future we will see more also ethnic diversity in Finnish films.
Yeah, I just also quite quickly like to add, yeah, it can start as early as like recruitment, like who feels welcome in film schools, etc. And so it's a lot of work, but I think, you know, it's heading in the right direction. And also about what might be different when it comes to like maybe the addition of more intersectional representation is very complicated, because on the one hand, as I mentioned, it can enhance, you know, viewers' empathy for others, or it can highlight, you know, problems that someone might not even consider, of course. On the other hand, just like the repeated assaults that happen to people, like visibly portraying people of color or trans people of color as the objects of some kind of suffering, also develops this impression and makes us see people in certain ways, which can be, it's complicated because it can highlight the issues, but it can also indirectly and not intentionally reinforce some of these, you know, stereotypes of seeing people in certain ways. So yeah, it's difficult, but it's something that definitely needs to be addressed, and I'm glad that we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important concerning Finland to realize that Women in Film and Television Finland was founded 2014. So it's really, really new as this kind of institutionalized activism. Of course, debates were there earlier, but I think all of us on this screen remember that, you know, these very new debates. And of course, I think it there is no law saying that there needs to be the kind of queue of underprivileged groups who gets to be depicted first and then others who have to wait. I think it's very good that these debates are happening. That's why I'm also feeling positive, because a lot of debate is happening, and I think art schools, actors, are acting students, the debates are enormously there all the time, and it's not a marginal issue, diversity in all of its aspects. So I'm hopeful in this sense that at least in the professions, among the professional community, but also for the wider public, both places, debates are happening, and I'm really happy that all projects do get challenged as well, so not only celebrated, and I think that's healthy. But we do need to remember that, you know, the 2014, around those times, gender neutral marriage law the campaign was there. You know, this is a value conservative country, even though we are, you know, next to Sweden. So Finland is basically very conservative. So it is part of my sort of positive tone today to see that, and there are cracks, and I just hope that the war context won't close them.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to mention that, because Anu brought up this Women in Finland, Film and Television Finland, that they are actually right now developing, or perhaps they've already developed a tool which will be available to all the production companies and all the financiers and whoever in the industry wishes to use it, which makes it easier when planning productions to kind of take all these questions in consideration. So like inclusivity and equality and diversity and all of these questions. So it's a new thing that is now happening.
Great,
And will
thank
help
you.
everybody.
So I'm going to blend here one more question that can be our final question, and everybody can again feel welcome to answer to this one, which is maybe a little bit more broadly. So what roles do you think that films like Force of Habit and others like this film play in advancing social change? And then kind of a another question tagged into here is, if you are teaching these, those of you who are teaching these kinds of films in your classrooms, how do you support students watching these films? So kind of the impact, the force of film in culture, in education. Anyone who would like to start?
Well, I can contend briefly while others ponder upon this. We made use of the outreach package at Tampere University for gender studies students, but I also had an MA student who works in a kind of girls' center or girls' activities center. And this MA student took those films into the kinds of practices within that activist center, featuring also some counseling practices. Unfortunately, I don't know now, since I've moved to another university, I don't know what's happening there. But I know why I say is that the outreach material was very sort of making all users aware of, on your own or together, of ways to get support. But my experience from those classrooms that I had was that people felt encouraged to speak and share, but also in a kind of silent so no, I have not experienced any very strong emotions, but very much comments. But they seem to, in my experience, the films engage students. But I also have experience of being one of the elderly women in the cinema, and having other elderly women or middle-aged women sort of start talking to unknown people about their experiences. So it's kind of interesting that I think that, of course, in those situations, no counseling is available, but it's a kind of sharing ideas.
I can briefly add that I would, because I do plan to teach this, and I've taught similar topics that show much more graphic scenes. I would, and this is more practical information, I would give content warnings well in advance, so that the student has time to process about what they might be consuming, but also like this film also showed, when the young girl on the bus, when she comes into the classroom, like the teacher can see that something is off. So, picking up on just any kind of discomfort, just be cognizant of that, and also make the film, if you can, accessible to the student, so that if they can't watch it for whatever deadlines or assignments or anything, maybe in their own time, in their own way, can watch some material that they might find difficult. So just something that I would do.
Does anyone have any final thoughts?
Well, I would just like to add that that yes, I perhaps I didn't used to believe that films can change the world, but after all what I've shared with you today, I must say that I have become a believer. And a film is a unique medium because it lets us real close to human experiences and feelings. And I'm also a strong believer of quotas, so by Finnish Film Foundation. So it would be great that we would take care that all of these underrepresented groups, be it women, gender or sexual minorities, or ethnic minorities, would get their voices heard. and their stories told. There's still so many films to make and so much to see.
That's a perfect note to end on, I think. Thank you all so much for talking with me today. It was really a pleasure to hear from all of you. And I think Mirva has the final word.
Yeah, just to echo that, thank you so much again to our panelists and moderator, and thank you to everyone in the audience for tuning in. So please keep an eye out for future events and webinars from Finlandia Foundation National's Young Leaders Board and the Embassy of Finland, Washington, D.C. But importantly, if you're a student interested in connecting professionally with Finland, feel free to check out our LinkedIn group, Finnish American Professional Network, and also remember to check out the scholarships available through the American Scandinavian Foundation. And thank you again to everyone involved in making this event happen. If you tuned in late, a recording of the webinar will be available on Scandinavia House's and Finlandia Foundation National's YouTube channels. And remember, the feature-length film Force of Habit is still available to stream online through Scandinavia House through March 3rd. Just follow the link in the chat anytime through March 3rd. The date listed on the top is when the streaming opened. But again, thank you everyone and take care.